In this video, we're going to be taking a look at how we can build the accessories for our creature or our character. And you can see I'm going to be concentrating on this little satchel kind of thing that's off to the side here. So for this, I think it's going to be fairly easy to start off with a shape. I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to append a cube, or actually any piece of geo, because we'll use that method of taking that and turning it into like a Q cube or Q sphere, Q cylinder. So I'm just going to use a cube 3D. Like I said, it doesn't really matter what we append right now for this. This just becomes a shape. And then we can come down here to initialize. And because this is not a primitive, and anything that's not a primitive, you can go to this initialize area and do Q cube, Q sphere, Q grid. I'm going to put on solo just so we can see what's going on here. That's what it looks like. I'll just put on Q cube, and that'll give us something kind of nice to work with inside a ZModeler to start messing around with this a little bit. Okay, so I'm going to put on ZModeler. Again, if you don't have the interface, you can just go to B and then Z, and then you can find ZModeler right there, like that. And then if we hover our cursor over a face, an edge, or a vert, and you hold down the space bar, you're going to get a whole menu set like what you see here. And if I hold down Alt, I can actually click and drag out polygons that I want to affect for this next stage. And I'm going to hover my cursor over a face like this, hold the space bar and do Q mesh. And it's set to single poly right now. You see the options, that's right there. But because we've already pre-selected these polygons, it will recognize that and take those polygons and extrude those. So that's the first kind of shape that we'll build for this here. Again, if I hold down Alt and I draw out maybe these pieces right here. Let me tap symmetry. I'm going to tap X for this. I forgot to have that on, so I'll hold down Alt and then click and drag on that. And let's see if I can do this now. I'm going to go back through and just reselect them like that. And then we'll push and pull this out. So that's going to give us that kind of lip that you see there, like that. Now if I wanted to do insert an edge loop, because you can see I'm starting to get this like tubing, and I need some right here. So I need some geometry for that. So I'll hover my cursor over an edge, hold down the space bar, and there's insert. And if I just click and drag out on here, it'll give me a new piece of geometry to kind of work with. And then, so what I'm going to do now is hold down Alt. I'll select this. Sorry. And I'm going to select this as far as tubing goes, and then we'll Q mesh and then just drag out just a little bit for that. Now, if we want to use dynamic subdiv with this, you can tap D, and the first time it's going to ask you if you want to auto-activate this dynamic subdiv. I'm just going to say yes for that. And this is the shape that we're getting right now. So let's hit Shift D. And what I think I'm going to do is, we've already got, for edges, we've already got an insert, and I'm going to insert maybe a loop here, and maybe a loop here, and maybe a loop here. And then that'll start to hold the shape a bit more for us. It won't be perfect or anything, but it's a start. Shift D to go out of that mode. Let's just go here, and I think I'm going to add a little bit more geo here, here, and here, and get it just a little bit more evenly spaced with some of this stuff. Now I'd like to start to build some rounding. Obviously we started with just a cube like this, so if we mask those parts out, holding down Control and then dragging, we can mask that part out. And if we Control tap in the screen, we can inverse that mask. Then we'll put on the gizmo tool and hold down Alt and put it into the center of the unmasked part. And then we can just draw or drag this back just a little bit. So let's tap D to see what's going on with our smooth mesh preview version on there. So that's looking pretty good. Okay. I think that's going to be enough for now to just generate this thing and get some shapes going. So with this whole dynamic subdiv, you can see there's only 2 subdivision levels. If I push it up a little bit higher, maybe to about right here. It gets rid of some of the faceting that we've got going on here. And I'll just go ahead and hit apply, and that'll transfer everything from the dynamic subdiv to actual subdivision levels. So now you can see we've got subdivision levels, and we got a shape that we can play around with. If we want, the cool thing about subdivision levels is if we drop this down a bit lower, if we wanted to tweak the shape of this, I can tap 4 for the move brush, so we're doing some larger proportional changes. We can start to manipulate this, tweak it a bit, right? Maybe I kind of put a little bit of a bend in here, pull up the corners, maybe pull this in a little bit. I can smooth the model out, just being kind of gentle with it, not like too heavy-handed with the smooth, because when you've got very little polygons to work with, smooth has a very strong effect to it. So you do want to be aware of that. And I was going to see if I could tuck these points in underneath there a little bit. So with the move brush, if you make a move brush small enough, it does feel like you're moving around maybe individual vertices at that point. So that if you're used to box modeling in Maya, it's similar-ish to that at that point. So I'm just going to drag corner in, maybe smooth it just slightly. Okay, I'll make my brush size really large because I should have kind of tweaked this before, but I'm going to push this in. I didn't want it to be so square-ish. So I'll tap D, and then see kind of where we're at with this. Oh, sorry, I forgot. We're not working with dynamic subdivision anymore. It'll still work, but we might as well just step up in the subdivision levels. So you can do tap D or Shift D will drop down in subdivision levels, and then if you tap D, that's the hotkeys for basically controlling this slider that you see here. And let's push this up just a little bit, and I'm going to smooth this out. So when you work with the subdivision levels, you can see I was at a much lower subdivision level to do really large proportional changes, and then now I want to refine this a bit more, so I go up maybe 2 subdivision levels, and then whenever I smooth, it's going to hold the shape better, but it's going to kind of start to round out parts and things like that. So that's kind of the power of working with these subdivision levels. And I don't have to worry about detail so much at this stage, but then if I want to start getting into detail, then I can keep pushing up in the subdivision levels that I do have for this. And that's going to give me enough geometry to kind of work with. So I'll kind of round that stuff out. And I kind of felt like if you start thinking about weight and then maybe this thing being pulled down a little bit, you can start to think about some things like that. There's not enough geometry right now to start doing this, where if, let's just say we're happy with the large shapes that we've made, and now we're going to start sculpting detail into this thing. You can see there's enough resolution to start to give the start of medium level detail. There's really not enough geo to kind of really support this. Now I do think it's always good to sculpt in stages, so this might not be horrible for just doing some really larger kind of like medium level detail for like shape separation and things like that. I'm not the biggest fan yet because I just have in the back of my mind I'd probably rather turn this into Dynamesh, and things are going to start to be a lot more flexible for me as I start to sculpt, and I don't have to worry about maybe what's going on with, like you see this pinching and stuff like that. That's part of the geometry there. There is this technique where you can smooth. If you hold on Shift to smooth and then you let go of Shift while you keep smoothing, it changes the smooth algorithm. And if you ever do get those pinching with geometry, like right here in the corner, that method of smoothing does help. does help smooth out and not pick up these like little points in through there. So again, it's you just start smoothing, and you can see how those points are kind of showing up here, and then while I'm smoothing, let go of shift, and then it changes the algorithm at that point to start smoothing around there. So I'm going to do for that real quick. So what I think I'm going to do, I might just hit just a little bit of this and through here, and I'm just imagining there's being some tension on these corners, and so that's why I'm doing some of these bigger lines like this and then smoothing that out to maybe give the illusion that there's some push and pull in that fabric. Yeah, so I'm gonna take this and just convert it over to Dynamesh. So I'll go here. I always start with about 500 or so, just never know exactly what's gonna happen with the Dynamesh resolution. Let's do this again. 500. Hit tab and click it on. And would you like to freeze subdivision levels? No. Okay, not high enough. Hopefully you saw the resolution there was just kind of very jaggedy. So from 500, I'm going to start going up to about 800 and see where we land on that. I hit no. Let's undo that. 1200. No. So it's not great, but I think it's going to be okay for this level that we're at right here. So I'm just holding down shift and kind of lightly smoothing on some of this. And I'm not a big fan of how that ended back here like that, so I can just smooth out the results of that like this. And maybe start tweaking the corner on here a little bit, smoothing some of that out, just like that. And so since we've already did these kind of wrinkles, if we've got more geometry to kind of work with, now we can start to emphasize these things a bit more. And maybe I'll just draw out from there a little bit. Kind of tighten up this corner. Re-emphasize some of this. Like that. And then now I'm going to draw, if this was maybe sewn together, this might be a piece here, this might be a piece here, and the piece on the bottom. So I'm going to start to indicate where there would be splits between the different pieces, kind of like that, and it gives a nice kind of pillowy effect. Now we're not seeing the back of this. If you wanted to make this all the way around to where it could come off the character, you would have to finish this out in some kind of way in the back. If you never see it, then it's not really as important. I don't believe I would ever see that on my character. I wasn't planning on taking it off, but just in case, if you are, you would have to finish this thing out all the way around like that. And then you might start thinking about some smaller areas of tension that happen like that. And then maybe there's a little bit of pull in through here. Like that. And then, so these are, I would say, probably like some of the most easiest wrinkle types to make right here. They're not super complex like another. If the cloth was really droopy, you would be doing more of a pattern kind of like this, where there's maybe tension here and here, and then it kind of is more loose in this area, and then you would have to start to raise certain areas. to build something like that, but that's not the surface type that we're doing. So it definitely could get way more complex depending on what that fabric type is and just how many wrinkles. The best thing to do is to figure out what that type of material it is that you're making, and you need to get as much reference as possible. Somebody that I like to look at for an artist, J.C. Leindecker. He's an older illustrator, and he's got some amazing illustrations that you can take a look at for, well, he does human characters and illustrations, but the way that he uses shapes to construct his illustrations, it's really nice to look at for clothing and the planes of the face. It's this comes out very geometric, so it almost feels like if you sculpted something out of maybe stone or something like that to generate shapes. The way he draws, I don't know, you just have to take a look at the artwork. Again, J.C. Leindecker, and it's a simplification of shapes, but it's done in such an efficient way that it works for sculpture, for taking a look at sculpture, for how you would make shapes too. Okay, so I think I'm getting there as far as the shape. Now, this is what I noticed with Dynamesh. I don't think the resolution is so great with this, so at this point I could bump this up and leave it even a little bit higher. So I'm going to go to like 1500 at this point, and then I'll remesh. And we do have this opportunity with clay polish, which sits right above Dynamesh. I'll hold down Shift to open up that part of the menu so we can see it too. So you could click the button maybe once. If you click it quite a few times, you're going to see it's going to really have a strong effect as far as filtering goes. You may want that, you may not. I usually just kind of like hit that maybe one time just to kind of smooth out any of these areas, and then maybe I got to go back with the smooth, holding down Shift, and just kind of lightly sculpt on there. Then I'm going to show you these brushes real quick for an artist called Ryan Kingsland. And so if I go to the comic key for my brushes, I've shown you in the past how we can set up a shortcut to go to a brushes menu that we've set up. And I like to store all my stuff on the cloud so I can always get to that. I made, under my brushes folder, you can see how I've set that up. ZBrush, ZBrush tools, and then I've got a brushes folder, and then this is my others folder. If I go to other, these are other artists that I found their brushes and really like their brushes. And then if I go to clothing, you can see if you did a search, you might still be able to find these brushes. There's still quite a few artists out there that are putting out some free brushes for doing seams for clothing and stuff like that. But this is Ryan Kingsland's got quite a few different brushes for doing this. I think I'm going to try this one, this double stitch, and we'll just run through that and try that out real quick. Maybe that's a little bit too large. Now the thing is, with these type of brushes, you probably need more resolution than what I've got. I think if I was going to look at this from this distance, this would be enough resolution for that. But if you're going to get up closer to this, take a look. This is already starting to fall apart, and this is falling apart through here. So we would, if we're going to go to this final detailing stage, we probably need to bump up quite a bit. So I'm going to go, just to try to be safe, about 2200. And sometimes it feels like I gotta just smooth out a little part and then re-Dynamesh to get it to pick up. I'll click clay polish once just to tighten some of that stuff up. So let's see what we got as far as resolution now. I think it's looking better. So the reason why these brushes are pretty cool, I think you can already see what's going on here. It builds like the piping, and it gives the illusion of the stitch already too. So it's just it's basically this repeating pattern, and as you drag your brush out, it keeps repeating that pattern over the duration of the stroke. So that's a really nice brush for this type of work. So let's do that. And I will pull off from here, do that, and I'll come along through here, do the back part, and what else? I'll just see what this looks like if I go along through here. Now, I'm not being super careful about anything with this because it could produce the effect of, you know, when somebody stitches these things together, a human is going to do it most likely, unless it's a manufactured process. But I'm going at it as if a human kind of stitched this together, and nothing's ever going to be perfect, right? So that's a case for letting the computer let it just be a little bit more rough, and I wouldn't call it a happy accident, but you get some of this more like not super precision kind of thing, and I think that works for this. If you saw on the other one, the other thing that I did, I didn't really do much with this, but I just held down Control and made a shape for this buckle. Now it's completely possible you could make an entirely different object for this, but I was just using the sculpt. I'm gonna hold down Control. Let's see. Why are you not unmasking? There we go. Sorry about that. It's in my mind I had that backwards for what I needed to do. So we've got our shape, and then I can take something like the move brush, make it pretty large, go out to the side, and then just maybe pull this forward and then pull that up like this, and then maybe I'll push this back like that to kind of grow out of there. And then if we remesh for Dynamesh, we get something like this. And then I've got to be careful that I don't smooth that part out too much. So let me remesh, and I'll smooth this part out. I could go back. If I tab B, I can go to my last brushes I had. Here's the seam brush. If I wanted to, I could just do something like that. That could potentially work. I'm going to hit the command key and go back to some of his other brushes that he's got. So there was another seam type that was simple. Let me just see what that looks like. This one's just a single stitch like that. Actually, none of those are working the way that I want. So I'm just going to use Damien Standard. I just basically wanted to give the illusion that there's like some kind of cut in here, and then this is coming out of that cut. And we could build some slight wrinkling like that coming off the side. And if I want to pull up the surface, I'm going to hold on Alt with Damien Standard. And like I said, just building that kind of lip. Like that. And maybe I dig in around the corners a little bit. And maybe have the illusion that this is pushing some of this material up. Just kind of like that. And then the last thing that I did on this was, let's just maybe we could do some trim dynamic on this part. And so if we're trying to maybe build that part out just a little bit and roughen that up a little bit more, we could do that. Then I was giving the illusion that maybe there was a button holding this. So if I hold down Control and then just keep drawing out, I do have symmetry on. So that's why I'm able to build with these type of strokes like a circle. I'll inverse Control click in the open viewport, and then I could use inflate. That'll push the surface out evenly. That's probably the smarter thing to do. We could use the move brush, make it really large too, and then kind of pull out that way as well. So that's a possibility. We can remesh. Now if we put on Damien Standard, again, we could give the illusion that maybe this is pulling on the surface a bit. So just do some marks kind of like that. And I'm just being pretty light with some of this stuff. So you can see as we get back, again, we're just trying to build that illusion that something's pulling on that. And I will do these little tiny things for maybe the button like that. Okay, so I did it on the top, I did it on the bottom, I think, as well. It doesn't matter. It's just up to you how you want to control that as far as the design goes. Okay. The other thing, let's go and do these actual pieces of geometry for stitching. So what I found, I've already pointed you to the orb brush set. So if I go back to my others folder, I've got the orb brush set, and within there, he's got this orb insert stitch. And this one's really nice too, where, again, if you wanted to have this illusion, like, I was using it for like some Frankenstein models that I had and things like that, where we could do some stitch going across things that way. But if you wanted, you could still do this with this type of work too, with leather and things like that. Now, got to be a little bit careful about how I control this. Now, because we're in Dynamesh, this is actually making insert mesh, so it's actual geo. So it's going to be nice and crisp. If you're at the stage where you're kind of done sculpting, you don't have to remesh, and you can leave it like this, and it'll be really nice and clean as far as what the geometry looks like. That's completely up to you. But if you want to incorporate it into the sculpt and then basically remesh, let's take a look at what that will look like. Just going to do one more here. So if we remesh, it will just join everything together. The only thing is, you know, you're gonna lose resolution. But again, I'm just thinking we're gonna be about, we don't want to get like super close to this thing. It's not a super hero asset. Now if you were gonna be pushing this and making for a game and it was a hero character and stuff like that, we would need to be working at even more resolution to where we can get into about this level and none of this stuff falls apart. So we are still a little bit kind of low on the resolution side, but again, everything that I've shown you as far as process, you still want to take that time to build up your shapes, worry about your primary forms, get all the primary forms done to the most part, and then start working on the medium level detail. And then this is, with some of these brushes, like with this seam brush and everything, it is medium level detail, but it's starting to push into what I consider as maybe some tertiary, like these little dots and things like that, is starting to push into that area as well. And then what we could look at now is for the very last part, I'm going to just store a morph target. And again, if you go into my interface, if you hold down control, you can always find where this stuff sits. So it's under morph target. We're going to store a morph target, and then that stores the state of our model where it currently sits right now. So it's like taking a model snapshot of this thing. Sorry, let me get it off that brush. I'm just going to delete morph target, store morph target again, because I accidentally pulled out one copy of that insert mesh brush. Didn't want it to mess up, because it looks at the topology. When you store a morph target, it knows how many vertices it has, how many faces, and it does a numbering throughout the model, and it stores information that way. So it's topology specific. So we store the morph target, and what I'm going to do now is I'm going to use the noise on here under surface. The reason I'm storing a morph target is because I want to be able to have the ability to brush out what we're about to do and have some control over that. So it's just a step before we start. I'll go to noise, and then I'm just going to use, this is just the default kind of surface noise that's on here, and you can change the scale of it. So if we're doing leather, we could do something like that. I just want to get just a little bit of noise on the surface, not tons. So just kind of like lightly draw that in like that. I'm I'm going to hit OK. Now that's just going to be a preview of what it's going to do before you actually apply it to the model. You have to click Apply to Mesh. If you want to mask by noise, you could turn it into a mask, and we could brush it in that way. That's possible. But I'm just going to hit Apply to Mesh. So it's a little, not quite as strong as what we were seeing, but it's pretty decent. Now that throws it over the entire model, right? And so this is why we store the morph target. Now I can hit Switch, and I don't have any of that detail on there. And I can go to the morph brush that I've got on my interface that you see down here. Again, you can go B and then M, and then you can go find morph that way. I can make my brush size a bit larger, and then now I can just start to brush in where do I want that noise to happen on the surface. That way maybe I can stay away from some of the detail that we've sculpted, and I could say like I don't obviously want that noise to be on the button and things like that, so we can just brush this stuff in, and we're starting to get, this is definitely what I'm considering the tertiary level detail. Okay. And then the last thing that I'll show you on this method here is that let's delete the morph target. I'm going to show you how we can take what we've sculpted and do a sharpening effect. And the way you do it feels really weird. It feels like you should just grab like a sharpen brush, or there should be a sharpen filter. But we're actually going to use a different filter. Well, I wouldn't say a filter. We're going to use a slider that's called polish. But within the morph area, this is where it gets a little bit crazy. In the morph target area, you can do a negative value for a morph target. And so if you think about this polish, it's going to soften everything, and then the opposite of soften will be sharpen. So we're going to use that to our advantage to sharpen this thing up. So let's go ahead and store a morph target. You see it's the same thing as hitting it here. And then we'll take the polish, and if you hold down Control, you can see where that sits. It's under deformation, and there's polish. I just drug that out to my interface. I'll make this 100%. It'll take a second to kind of calculate through that, and you can see how soft that made everything. Now with the morph target, you can say switch. So I'm going to switch it back to the original state. So we're switching back and forth between these two different states that we have. I'll put it back to the original state, and here's our morph slider, and then this is a positive value, and then this is a negative value. So I'm going to just drag it negative, and you can see how I'm starting to just take that and then sharpen everything up. And with the slider value, this might be just too strong for you, so you can get some kind of in between for that. And I think that's going to be pretty good for that. If you want, you can remesh, but if you don't have enough resolution on Dynamesh, it will kind of re-soften some of that stuff back up. If we did look at Dynamesh, you can see there's a blur on there. If you took that all the way down to 0, maybe that helps keep some of that sharpening effect. I'm just going to hold down Shift and lightly smooth on that, and then remesh. So yeah, I think if you turn the blur off, it does a little bit better job. So I think that crispens things up and makes it kind of read a little bit better from this kind of distance. And don't be afraid to, even at this part, if you evaluate your model and I feel like this feels just a little bit stiff shape-wise, and I still kind of want to tweak some of this out a little bit, you can still get things like with the move brush, and you can kind of still move this around and still kind of tweak on the shape a bit. So don't be afraid to evaluate your model at even later stages and say, yeah, I'm just not exactly happy with everything and the way that it turned out, and maybe I need to push my shapes a little bit more just to give it a little bit more character. Okay, so I think that's going to be pretty good for this. So as I bring everything back, let's see, I wasn't even really paying attention to what the size of the scale was, so I can try to move this forward. Let's see, I've got symmetry turned on. Let's move this forward. I'll hold down Alt to go to the unmasked center point. Hold down Alt to reset the orientation of that. And then I can rotate this, make it a little bit larger. And if I was really making this for the character like I did the other one, before I did all the detailing and everything, we would have taken our primary shapes and we would have fit it to the model and had an understanding of the scale at the very beginning. So sorry, I should have done that, but just for the demonstration purposes, I wasn't really thinking about putting on the character. And I won't keep this. I just kind of wanted to evaluate and see what this might look like. Because you see how I wasn't happy with how thick it was kind of going out. So then that changes the proportional stuff quite a bit. So yeah, so always like rough out your proportional stuff at the beginning. Okay. And you can see with this, because I was just not really paying attention, there is quite a bit difference in style for what's going on here. Pretty much for this one, everything was all hand sculpted except for these little stitch things that you see there. So that's why it's producing a different effect. Now I did want to show you those brushes by Ryan Kingsland. I thought they'd be pretty nice. So you can see if you're going to do something that's more stylized versus maybe some of this stuff is feeling a bit more realistic, and I've really pushed more on the tertiary detail as far as like how much details on the surface of that starts to change things from a stylistic kind of look. Okay, so I'm just gonna go and actually just hide this new one. I had an old bag on there too. So I think that should give you everything that you need to kind of understand for creating these parts. Now, I will go through, I haven't finished what I'm going to do for the belt for this, so if you see that pop up, I'm going to go through a very similar process. The only thing that I did for the belt for creation on this is if we go to our primitive types and we do a cylinder, you can see with the primitive types, here's what I put for the options for creating a cylinder like that. So you can see with this inner radius, I pushed that quite a bit, so it actually just makes a ring, more of a ring. And then changing the divides, 32 this way around. The V divide was 4, and it gives you this what you're looking for here. So just taking that, turn it into a piece of geometry. You've already seen how we can use the move brush to kind of manipulate shapes and push and pull the shapes around. So that's really everything that was used to build that shape, and then just kind of fit it and move it and position it. Again, I'm not exactly sure what I'm going to do design-wise for that. Probably not too much, and I think I'm getting what I consider pretty close to being done with this character. I think the next video that you're probably going to see from me is going to show how we can maybe take all the things that we've sculpted and transfer it from Dynamesh into subdivision levels, because what I'm going to show is a process how we can pose this thing, and if we're going to pose it, you want to have subdivision levels on this just to make it more manageable. So that'll be the next part coming up.